On a brutal winter morning in a quiet Iowa town, a 78-year-old retired math teacher walked into her local bank and noticed something no one else would have cared about. Just 42 cents were missing from her pension. To the young bank manager, it was laughable. To everyone else, it was nothing. But to Martha Miller, it was proof. Because numbers don't lie, people do. And when that elderly woman looked up from her statement and saw the luxury Rolex on the banker's wrist, she realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a message. What started with 42 cents would uncover a fraud worth millions, expose a man hiding behind charm and charity, and remind an entire town of one unforgettable truth. Wisdom never retires. By dawn, the whole town looked carved out of salt and silence. Snow banked against porch rails and mailbox posts, burying the lower halves of things that, in warmer months, seemed steady and familiar. The church steeple at the center of town wore a hard white cap. Main Street's brick storefronts, hardware, pharmacy, bakery, diner, sat beneath a low sky the color of tarnished pewter. The wind moved through the side streets with a thin, needling cry, slipping under doors and through window seams as if the season itself were trying to get inside. At 78, Martha Miller knew how to walk through cold without fighting it. She came down Maple Street in a long gray coat, a forest green scarf tucked neatly at the collar, her gloved hand wrapped around a walnut cane polished smooth by use and time. Her boots pressed careful marks into the fresh snow. She moved slowly but not weakly. There was a difference, though most people no longer bothered to notice it in the elderly. Martha had spent 42 years teaching mathematics at Willow Creek High School. Generations of students had sat beneath her chalkboard, shifting in their seats while she explained that numbers did not care about excuses, popularity, or charm. They either balanced or they did not. Truth, she often said, was not emotional. That was what made it trustworthy. By the time she reached First Prairie Community Bank, her cheeks were red from the wind. She stamped the snow from her boots and stepped inside. The warmth hit her first, dry, overworked, metallic. Then the smells, stale coffee from the staff station, printer ink, floor polish, wet wool from customers' coats. Somewhere behind the counters, a machine hummed in a steady electric drone. A holiday garland still hung over the teller windows, even though Christmas was long past, and a red poinsettia in the corner had begun surrendering leaf by leaf. Martha unbuttoned her coat, slipped a folded statement from her handbag, and approached the counter. The teller was young, maybe 23, with glossy hair, pale pink nails, and the polite brightness of someone trained to sound helpful before deciding whether a person was worth listening to. "Good morning, Miss Miller," she said with a practiced smile. "What can I do for you today?" Martha laid the statement flat on the counter and smoothed its edge with 2 fingers. "There's a discrepancy in my pension deposit." The teller tilted her head. "What kind of discrepancy?" 42 cents are missing." The young woman blinked once, then twice. "I'm sorry?" Martha's expression did not change. "My monthly pension should total what it has totaled within a predictable adjustment range. This month it is short by exactly 42 cents. The teller gave a little laugh before she could stop herself. 42 cents? Yes. She clicked through several screens, eyes darting back and forth. A small frown touched her face, then vanished. When she looked up again, the smile returned, thinner now. "It looks normal to me." "It is not normal. Maybe it's just a tiny automatic adjustment." Martha looked at her over the rim of her glasses. Banks do not lose money by accident, and when they do not lose it in perfect decimals. The teller shifted her weight. "Would you like me to get the branch manager?" "I would." A minute later, Julian Vane emerged from the glass office and back. Everything about him seemed designed to communicate competence. His suit was charcoal and perfectly tailored. His tie was silk, understated in the expensive way. His hair was neat without looking stiff. He wore the kind of smile people trusted at banquets and donor luncheons. In a bigger city, he would have looked ambitious. In Willow Creek, he looked imported. He took the statement, glanced at it, then at her. "What seems to be the concern, Miss Miller?" "My pension deposit is short by 42 cents. For one brief instant, his expression went blank, not confused, but calculating. Then the smile returned. 42 cents, he repeated. Yes. Julian set the paper down and folded his hands over it. Miss Miller, with respect, I think you may be overanalyzing this. Martha said nothing. He continued in a tone so polished it bordered on cruel. At your age, these things can get a little confusing. Statements, decimals, timing. I'm sure there's a simple explanation, but I really don't think this is worth distressing yourself over. Behind him, the teller looked down at her screen. Martha felt the familiar stillness settle over her. The same stillness she used to feel before correcting a student who was very sure he was smarter than the room. I am not distressed, she said. I am attentive. Julian smiled as though indulging a harmless eccentricity. It's 42 cents. It is my 42 cents. And I'm telling you, he said, voice cooling, there is no issue here. Then Martha's eyes moved briefly to his wrist. There it was. A Rolex. Not an imitation. Not a flashy salesman's trinket. The real thing. Heavy. Elegant. Quietly ostentatious in the way only very expensive objects are. The black dial caught the bank's fluorescent light with a muted gleam. Martha had never cared for jewelry, but she understood cost. She understood ratios. She understood salary ranges in small Iowa towns. A $20,000 watch did not belong on the wrist of a local bank manager whose public image was built on modesty and community charm. Julian noticed her glance and pulled his cuff down almost imperceptibly. That tiny motion told her more than his words had. I believe, Martha said softly, that there is very much an issue. Julian's smile tightened. Miss Miller, I don't have time to debate pennies. No, Martha replied. I imagine you prefer larger numbers. The teller looked up sharply. Julian's jaw hardened for the first time. Have a good day. He turned and walked back toward his office. Martha left the bank with the statement in her bag and the winter wind cutting across her face like broken glass. The street was nearly empty. Snow hissed over the pavement in light, dry skims. Somewhere far off, a church bell rang the hour. 42 cents. To anyone else, it would have been too small to matter. To Martha Miller, it was exactly big enough to be deliberate, and deliberate errors were never errors at all. They were messages. Martha's house stood 3 streets over from Main, a narrow white clapboard home with blue shutters, a deep front porch, and a porch swing chained still for winter. Snow had piled along the steps and softened the edges of the yard fence until the whole property looked as though it had been half remembered rather than fully seen. Inside, the air smelled of old books, peppermint tea, lemon oil, and the faint ghost of chalk dust that seemed never to leave a teacher's home no matter how many years passed. The quiet there was intimate, not empty, layered. A clock ticked in the parlor. The old radiator in the hallway clicked and sighed. Floorboards answered her footsteps with familiar wooden murmurs. On the kitchen shelf sat blue willow plates, a ceramic sugar bowl shaped like a cottage, and a row of tea tins labeled in her neat cursive hand. On the mantel, beside a framed photograph of her late husband Daniel in a fishing cap and plaid shirt, stood a brass school bell that had once sat on her desk in room 214. She set water to boil, removed her gloves, and sat at the kitchen table beneath a hanging lamp whose yellow light turned the room warm despite the cold at the windows. Again, she studied the statement. Again, 42 cents. She took a pencil from the crock near the sink and wrote the figure on the back of an envelope, 0.42. Then beneath it, why that amount? People assumed aging blurred the mind. Martha had learned the opposite could also be true. Once the noise of ambition, hurry, and vanity fell away, certain kinds of thought became sharper, cleaner. She had no children in the house anymore. No husband to care for, no faculty meetings, no term deadlines, no busy work pretending to be purpose. She had time, and time in the hands of an intelligent woman was dangerous. After a long sip of tea, she rose and went to the storage room at the back of the house. The room smelled like cedar, dust, and sealed years. Stacked boxes lined the walls, lesson binders, old-school yearbooks, holiday decorations, Daniel's tackle box, a globe outdated by geopolitics. In the corner sat a travel trunk with brass corners and peeling hotel stickers from a trip she and Daniel had taken west before money got tight and life got smaller. Martha knelt beside it with a stiffness she refused to resent and opened the lid. Inside were envelopes of photographs, tied bundles of letters, old report cards, and classroom keepsakes she had never found the heart to throw away. She sifted through them until she found the one she wanted. Advanced Calculus. Spring semester. 20 years ago. The class photo was slightly bent at the edge. Teenagers arranged in rows, all awkwardness and unfinished identity. Some grinned too broadly. Some looked trapped. Some already wore the faces they would keep for life. Martha's finger moved slowly across the third row. Then it stopped. Justin Vale. Even at 17, his intelligence had announced itself before he ever opened his mouth. He had been handsome in a polished, careful way, with sharp features and cool eyes that seemed always to be weighing other people for weakness. His mathematical ability had been extraordinary. He could dismantle a theorem faster than most students could understand the question. He saw patterns instantly. He was, in pure intellectual terms, one of the most gifted students she had ever taught. He was also, even then, morally hollow. Martha could remember the day she caught him as clearly as if the chalk were still in her hand. Rain tapped at the classroom windows that afternoon. The room smelled of wet coats, pencil shavings, and the waxy residue of cafeteria floors tracked in on student shoes. It was exam day. The class had gone silent in the way only a room full of frightened teenagers in difficult calculus can become silent. Justin had been writing too smoothly. Not struggling, not pausing, not thinking, performing. Martha had walked the aisle once, then again. On the third pass, she took a transparent strip tucked beneath his ruler, formulas written in microscopic print. When she placed her hand on the ruler, he looked up, not with guilt, but irritation, as if she had interrupted something beneath him. "You'll come with me now," she had said. He leaned back and met her eyes. "You're making a mistake." "No," she replied, "you did." The school later uncovered more than a cheat sheet. Stolen answer keys, manipulated grading access, quiet little systems built inside other systems. He had called it efficiency, optimization. Everyone else eventually called it fraud, and he had been expelled. Now he was standing in a bank under the name Julian Vane, wearing civic respectability like a winter coat and a Rolex no honest small-town salary could justify. Martha sat slowly on the edge of a storage box, the photograph in one hand and her pension statement in the other. Outside, a gust of wind struck the house so hard the siding creaked. "A ghost from the past," she murmured. But not really, not a ghost, a pattern returning in a different form. She brought the photo back to the kitchen and set it beside her tea. Then she opened a legal pad and drew a vertical line down the center. On the left side, she wrote, Julian Vane. On the right side, Justin Vale. Then beneath, mathematically gifted, emotionally cold, thrives on control, uses systems, not force, resents being corrected, steals where others fail to look. She stared at the final line for a long time. Then she underlined it twice. That night, the snow came harder. Wind rubbed bare branches against the window glass with a sound like fingernails. In the kitchen, under the yellow light, Martha sat with pencil, photo, and statement, until long after most of Willow Creek had gone dark. By the time she stood to turn off the lamp, she no longer believed 42 cents was an isolated discrepancy. She believed it was the edge of something much larger. And she had spent a lifetime teaching students what to do when a problem looked too large. Break it down, find the structure, solve what others missed. The Willow Creek Diner was already alive when Martha arrived the next morning. Warm air pushed back against the cold each time the door opened. Bacon grease snapped on the grill. Coffee steamed from thick white mugs. The floor near the entrance was slick with melting snow and scattered salt. A radio near the pie case played a country song too softly to make out, and the waitress moved from table to table with the efficient grace of a woman who could refill coffee, settle an argument, and remember 6 orders at once. In the back booth beneath a framed black and white photo of Main Street in 1958 sat the Morning Coffee Club, Willow Creek's unofficial council of the elderly, the opinionated, and the impossible to hurry. Edith Barker was already there in a maroon coat and lipstick too bright for breakfast. Walter Jensen had his veteran's cap on and his usual complaint about the roads. Nora Beth Pike, who still wore perfume to the diner every morning, was stirring cream into her coffee like she was punishing it for existing. Two retired farmers argued softly over weather patterns no one could control. When Martha slid into the booth, Edith squinted at her. "You look like you are about to accuse one of us of tax fraud." "Only if one of you deserves it," Martha said. Walter chuckled. "That's the closest thing to good morning we'll get from you, I suppose." Martha set her handbag on the seat beside her. "I need to ask all of you something serious." That changed the air at once. There was a tone she used, rare, measured, exact, that everyone at that table remembered from some earlier version of themselves. The tone that meant this was no gossip, no diner chatter, no winter boredom. "What happened?" Nora Beth asked. Martha took out her statement and laid it flat beside the sugar caddy. "My pension deposit was short by 42 cents. Walter stared. 42 cents? "Yes," Edith snorted. "Martha, darling, maybe this is one of those times you're being a little too..." "Detailed?" Martha asked. "Relentless." "Good, then I'm still myself." That drew a few faint smiles, but only for a moment. Martha leaned in. "I want each of you who banks at First Prairie to show me your last 6 monthly statements." The table went still. Walter frowned. "Why?" "Because I do not believe I am the only one." "Over cents?" "Especially over cents." One by one they reached for purses, coat pockets, folded envelopes. Elderly people save paperwork the way younger people save screenshots. Messily, defensively, and with more intuition than organization. Soon the table was covered in statements, receipts, reading glasses, and the clutter of ordinary financial life. Martha spread everything out with the calm efficiency of a surgeon preparing instruments. The diner noises faded behind the narrowing tunnel of her attention. Plates clinked. The grill hissed. Someone laughed at the counter. A spoon rang against a mug. But she moved into that old internal place where only logic remained. Date, amount, adjustment, decimal, interval. She began circling tiny discrepancies. 11 cents, 34, 22, 58. Some appeared as processing variance, others as reconciliation correction. A few were buried inside bundled entries that would have meant nothing to anyone glancing over a balance while waiting for soup to heat. But Martha was not glancing. She was hunting. "Look at this," she murmured, half to herself. Edith craned her neck. "What?" Martha tapped the page. "The amounts vary, but the timing doesn't. Not perfectly, but structurally." Walter squinted. "English teacher." "It means the theft is wearing camouflage," Martha said. Just then the diner bell over the front door jingled, and Lucas Reed stepped in, shoulders dusted with snow. Lucas had once been one of Martha's best students. Now in his mid-30s, he ran the town library and unofficially fixed half the town's computer problems when they got beyond the capabilities of prayer and unplugging. He had the broad build of a farm kid who'd grown up carrying things, the thoughtful face of a man who read constantly, and the cautious kindness of someone who had never stopped respecting the woman who taught him proofs. He spotted her and smiled. "Miss Miller." "Lucas," she said without looking up. "Sit down." He sat. Then he saw the papers. "Should I be worried?" "Yes," Martha said. He blinked. "About what?" She turned the legal pad toward him. On it were columns of decimal adjustments, dates, ratios, and frequency marks. "I believe First Prairie Bank is running a salami-slicing fraud scheme against senior accounts." Lucas stopped smiling. "A what?" "A digital skim. Tiny amounts. Pennies, fractions. Taken from a large population in ways designed to avoid scrutiny. Too small to provoke alarm individually. Catastrophic in aggregate." Lucas leaned closer. "You're serious?" Martha reached into her bag and placed the old class photograph beside the statements. Then she slid over a newspaper clipping from the local paper featuring Julian Vane at a scholarship fundraiser. Lucas's eyes moved from one face to the other. "Wait," he said, "that's..." "Yes, Julian. Justin Vale." Lucas exhaled. "Oh, no," Martha nodded once. "Oh, yes." For the next 30 minutes they worked together at the diner booth while the rest of the coffee club watched with increasing unease. Lucas entered figures into a spreadsheet on his laptop. Martha fed him data from the statements. They identified repeated timing cycles hidden inside irregular posting language. They mapped decimal variance ranges. They estimated the likely number of affected local accounts based on county demographics. And then the shape of the thing emerged. Lucas looked up first. My God. What? Edith asked. Lucas turned the screen around. If this pattern scales across even a fraction of the bank's senior account base, he said, he's not stealing dollars, he's stealing streams. Martha finished the sentence for him. And streams become rivers. Walter took off his cap and scratched the top of his head. How much? Martha looked at her notes. If the pattern extends beyond Willow Creek, she said, possibly millions over time. No one at the table spoke. The diner seemed suddenly too bright, too warm, too ordinary for what was sitting between the salt shaker and the coffee cups. Nora Beth's voice came out barely above a whisper. He's been stealing from old people. Yes, Martha said. Edith stared at the statements as though they might rearrange themselves into something less ugly. All those donations, the scholarships, the food drive. Lucas shut the laptop halfway. That may be part of the laundering strategy. Public generosity buys trust. Walter's jaw tightened. That snake. Martha sat back. Her tea had gone cold beside her. Outside the frosted window, snow drifted in thin white bands across the street. A pickup truck rolled past, tires crunching over packed ice. Somewhere at the counter, someone laughed at a joke no longer belonging to the same world. Martha looked at the numbers again. There it was. Not suspicion now. Pattern. And once mathematics became pattern, denial was just cowardice with better tailoring. That afternoon, Martha returned to the bank. She did not call first. She did not ask for an appointment. She simply walked in, removed her gloves finger by finger, and told the receptionist she needed a private word with Mr. Vane. Julian received her in his office with visible reluctance wrapped in visible charm. The office was designed to suggest integrity. Glass walls, framed certificates, a sepia photograph of the old grain elevator, a plaque from the Chamber of Commerce thanking him for outstanding civic generosity, a crystal bowl of peppermint candies, everything clean, curated, and false. Martha stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Julian remained standing for a moment, one hand resting on the back of his chair. What can I do for you, Miss Miller? Martha set a folder on his desk. You can start by dropping the name Julian. He did not react immediately. That was what made him dangerous. He had learned how to hold his face still. I'm sorry? Justin, she said, we've already dispensed with theater. A long beat passed, then he sat slowly. I'm afraid you're mistaken. No, Martha replied. I taught you advanced calculus in the spring of your senior year. You sat in the third row. You cheated. I expelled you. And now you steal money from pensioners while pretending to be their benefactor. Julian's eyes dropped to the folder. May I? You may look. Inside were copies of statements, Martha's calculations, and a side-by-side printout of his current photograph next to the old class image. He leafed through them once, casually. Then he looked up and laughed, not loudly, not warmly, the laugh of a man delighted by what he believed was an imbalance of power. Miss Miller, he said, leaning back, you really are still living in a classroom. Martha remained standing. You think pencil arithmetic and some old records amount to evidence? I think truth amounts to evidence. The arithmetic merely reveals it. Julian folded his hands across his chest. That's the problem with people your age. You confuse intuition with a proof. No, Martha said. People your age confuse software with morality. The smile slipped. Only a little. Julian stood and walked around the desk, stopping close enough that the expensive watch on his wrist caught the light again. He lowered his voice, making it private and poisonous. Let me explain something to you. The law does not care about your notebook. The law cares about verifiable digital systems, institutional reporting, chain of custody, technical audit standards. You have none of those. I will. He smiled, but now there was no friendliness left in it at all. You are a retired widow living alone in a small town. If you start making accusations like this publicly, I will say you are confused. I'll say you've become obsessed. I'll say your grief has affected your judgment. With a few careful conversations, this town will start whispering words like memory loss, decline, dementia. The word landed in the room like something rotten. Martha's face remained calm, but inside she felt something old and iron-hard straighten. He saw it and mistook it for fragility. That's how this works now, he said softly. Not with chalkboards, with perception. Martha studied him in silence long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then she spoke. When you were 17, she said, your worst quality was not dishonesty. His jaw tightened. It was vanity. You always needed someone watching when you thought you were winning. Julian took one more step closer. Get out of my office. Martha gathered the folder. At the door, she looked back. You are correct about one thing, Justin, she said. I am no longer in a classroom. He said nothing. So now, Martha continued, there will be consequences. Then she walked out, leaving him in the polished quiet of his office with his plaque, his glass walls, and the first real threat he had faced in 20 years. The library annex behind Willow Creek Public Library was not much to look at from the outside. Cinder block walls, a side entrance that stuck in wet weather, a flickering security light over the rear door. But inside, Lucas had made it a strange little sanctuary of order. Half archive, half digital workshop, all stubborn functionality. Old local newspapers sat boxed and labeled on one wall. On another were shelves of donated monitors, routers, cables, and obsolete computer parts Lucas kept because, in a town like Willow Creek, obsolete often meant still useful if you know what you're doing. Martha sat at a long table while Lucas reviewed the evidence she had gathered. A desk lamp cast a clean white circle over the paperwork. Outside, evening snow tapped lightly against the annex windows. The room smelled of paper dust, overheated circuitry, and the peppermint candies Martha had brought in her handbag and set between them. Lucas finished reading and leaned back. He threatened to paint you as incompetent. Yes. Lucas looked angry in the quiet, controlled way decent men do when cruelty offends them personally. Then we can't just accuse him. We have to corner him. Martha nodded. Exactly. Lucas turned his laptop toward her. I can't legally hack the bank, and even if I could, it would taint everything. But I can help build a trap, using his greed and his ego. Martha considered that. Justin had never simply wanted to win. He had wanted to feel superior while winning. That had always been the crack in him. Vanity, the need to perform brilliance, the need to stand above. Then we give him a stage, she said. Lucas smiled faintly. That sounds like something you taught us. I taught you many things. You definitely taught me never to underestimate a quiet woman with a legal pad. Together they began to shape the plan. They would not threaten Julian. They would not beg authorities to believe a hunch. They would lure him into speaking. Lucas unpacked two small devices from a padded case. One was a micro camera no larger than a shirt button. The other was a high-gain audio recorder with enough clarity to catch a whisper across a room. Martha looked at them over her glasses. That tiny thing records video? In 4K, Lucas said. She gave him a dry look. Show off. He grinned. Back at her house, they tested sightlines in the living room. Martha's old classroom chalkboard, rescued years ago when the school renovated, hung on one wall above a narrow oak cabinet. Its frame was thick enough to conceal the camera. Lucas adjusted the angle until it captured the center of the room, the board, and the armchair opposite. He concealed the recorder in the cabinet below and linked both systems to a redundant save path on an encrypted drive at the library annex. In case he smashes one, Lucas explained. Good. Then came the bait. Martha sat in her armchair by the fire, fingertips pressed together, and thought like a thief. Not how to steal, how to tempt. Justin was greedy, yes, but not crudely. He would not come for $100. He would not risk exposure for something small. The bait had to be large enough to awaken appetite and private enough to suggest he could exploit it. When Martha finally spoke, her voice was low and certain. I will tell him I found cash my husband hid under the floorboards. Lucas looked up from the laptop. How much? $500,000. Lucas blinked. That should do it. He stared at her, then laughed once in disbelief. Miss Miller, remind me never to play cards with you. Lucas, she said, I taught teenagers for 42 years. Bluffing is merely a more adult version of classroom management. By the end of the night, the trap was ready. The fire had burned low. The room smelled of ashes, cedar, and tea. Lucas packed up the extra equipment and paused at the door. You know he's dangerous. Yes. I mean socially, legally, financially. Men like him don't panic like regular people. Martha stood beneath the hall lamp, one hand resting lightly on the cane. That's all right. Lucas hesitated. Why? Her eyes sharpened. Because I don't intend to make him panic, she said. I intend to make him boast. The next day, Martha returned to First Prairie Bank looking older than she had looked the day before. It was performance, of course, but it was careful performance. She let her shoulders slope. She allowed a faint tremor into her left hand. She paused once near the entrance, as though briefly uncertain whether she had meant to come in at all. Her scarf was wrapped a little crooked. Her handbag hung open an inch too far. It was not caricature. That would have insulted the role and exposed the trick. It was subtler than that. She entered as many elderly people entered rooms when the world had begun training itself not to listen. Julian saw her almost immediately. He came out from his office wearing his public smile, the smile for donors, widows, church fundraisers, and town photographers. Miss Miller, he said warmly, how nice to see you again. Martha lowered her eyes. I think I may have made a fuss yesterday for no good reason. Julian's face softened with instant false compassion. These things happen. I get mixed up sometimes. Yes, he said gently. I understand. He did not understand, but he liked the direction. Martha glanced around as though afraid of being overheard. There's something private I should ask you. Of course. He guided her toward a side desk with the smooth possessiveness of a predator disguising itself as care. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. My husband, she said, never trusted banks. Julian said nothing. He used to keep cash in the house. I found more of it after he passed, hidden beneath an old floorboard in the living room. His eyes did not widen, but they sharpened. How much cash? Martha looked embarrassed, ashamed, hesitant. Around 500,000. The air seemed to tighten between them. Julian kept his face composed with impressive skill, but greed is never entirely facial. It lives in the stillness first, in the delayed blink, in the slight narrowing of attention, in the body's sudden inward turn toward opportunity. That's substantial, he said carefully. I don't want the government involved, Martha whispered. Taxes, questions, forms. I don't understand any of it. I thought perhaps, since you're such a good man, you might help me deposit it quietly. A beat. Then Julian smiled with holy concern. Miss Miller, I would hate for you to be taken advantage of. Martha lowered her gaze. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. He almost smiled at the irony. Perhaps, he said, I could stop by your home after hours, just to assess the situation privately. She touched his sleeve lightly, like an old woman grateful for kindness. I knew I could trust you. Julian's watch flashed once as he checked the time. I can come this evening. Thank you, Mr. Vane. When she turned to leave, she let her gait remain just slightly unsteady until she reached the front doors. Only once she was outside in the winter air did she straighten. The cold struck her cheeks. Snow skated in thin veils across the sidewalk. Across the street, the pharmacy's neon sign buzzed faintly in the gray day. Martha breathed once, slowly. The hook was deep. Now all she needed was for greed to tug. By 7 that evening, Martha's living room had been transformed into a stage disguised as memory. The fire in the grate was low and amber. Only 2 lamps were lit, leaving soft pools of golden light in corners of deliberate shadow. The room smelled of cedar smoke, old paper, and peppermint. On the wall, the old classroom chalkboard waited above the oak cabinet, its black surface newly cleaned, a single piece of white chalk resting on the tray below. Lucas had already left by the back door after confirming that the camera feed and audio recorder were active. The backup system at the library annex was armed. Every word spoken in that room would survive, even if the equipment did not. At 7:13 p.m., headlights swept across the curtains. A car door opened, closed, boots on the porch, then a knock. Martha opened the door. Julian stood framed by the porch light in a camel-colored overcoat. Leather gloves in one hand, expensive shoes dusted white at the edges. He looked less like a banker tonight and more like a man arriving for a transaction no one else was meant to know about. "Miss Miller," he said softly. "Come in, Justin." The use of his real name struck him, but only for a second. Then he stepped inside. His eyes moved quickly over the room. Furniture, cabinet, rug, wall vents, floorboards. He was hunting already. "You have a lovely home," he said. "It remembers more than people think," Martha replied. He removed his coat and draped it over a chair. "Now, about the money." In a moment, she moved toward the chalkboard. Something in the room changed. The warmth remained, but tension thickened the air beneath it. Julian watched her. Martha picked up the chalk. "Do you remember," she asked, "what I used to tell my students before a difficult test?" He said nothing. She wrote in steady white script across the board. 2x x2 plus 1 dx. Then she stepped aside. "One final problem," she said. Julian stared at the equation, then at her. For a moment, his disbelief seemed genuine. Then he laughed. "You invited me here for a calculus joke?" "No," Martha said. "I invited you here because you cannot resist proving yourself superior." The smile vanished. "Where is the money?" "Answer the problem." His voice hardened. "I am not one of your students." "No," Martha said quietly. "You are what happens when talent grows without character." That did it. Something hot and ugly flashed through him. The old rage of a boy caught cheating, amplified by years of practiced deceit and adult power. He took 2 steps forward. "You think any of this matters?" he snapped. "A chalkboard? A house full of old books? You should have stayed confused." Martha did not move. He laughed again, but now there was no charm in it at all. "Do you know how easy this was?" he said. "Your town practically built a scheme for me. Seniors, fixed incomes, low digital awareness. No one checks decimal drift. No one questions micro adjustments labeled as system reconciliation. Pennies disappear into process noise, and all of you keep smiling because the statements arrive on nice paper." His face had changed completely now. This was Justin, the boy she remembered. Bright, contemptuous, hungry. "I made it elegant," he continued, almost proud. "That's the beauty of beans. Never the same amount twice. Never enough to trigger immediate complaints. Thousands of accounts losing almost nothing. But almost nothing, multiplied across time and scale, that becomes a fortune." Martha's gaze remained steady. "And the donations?" she asked. Julian smirked. "Cheap camouflage. It costs very little to buy admiration in a town desperate for heroes." He pointed at the board. "That problem? It's beneath me." "Then solve it." He strode to the chalkboard, snatched up the chalk, and wrote the answer in swift, angry strokes. Entire 2 plus 1 plus C. Then he turned, breathing slightly faster. "There," he said. "Satisfied?" Martha looked at him, then at the chalkboard, then very slightly above it, where the hidden lens watched everything. "Yes," she said. A mechanical click sounded from inside the cabinet. Julian froze. "What was that?" Martha set the chalk down with exquisite care. "That," she said, "was the sound of your final test being graded." For the first time all evening, genuine fear crossed his face. The annual Willow Creek Town Hall meeting was part civic ritual, part pageant, part communal self-portrait. The auditorium filled early. Folding chairs stretched in rows beneath old brass lights. The varnished floor reflected shoes, hems, and the movement of children too restless to sit still. A long table near the back held casseroles, cookies, and silver coffee urns. The mayor reviewed note cards at the podium. The school band had already played 2 songs slightly too fast. The big projection screen above the stage glowed with the opening slide of the evening's featured presentation. Julian Vane, Citizen of the Year. His smiling photo filled the screen beside words like leadership, generosity, and community renewal. People clapped when he entered. Of course they did. Julian had spent months purchasing goodwill with stolen pennies and public warmth. He shook hands. He bent graciously toward older women. He thanked the mayor with modest humility. Under the stage lights, his Rolex gleamed like a private joke. 3 rows from the back, Lucas sat with a laptop case at his feet. Near the side wall stood 2 men in plain winter coats who looked like they were simply attending, though they were paying attention to too many exits to be locals. And near the side entrance, hat in hand, stood Martha Miller. The mayor stepped to the microphone. In times like these, he began, a town survives because certain people step up. Martha started walking. At first, only a few people noticed. An elderly woman moving toward the stage should not have felt like a disruption, but there was something in her pace, unhurried, calm, inevitable, that drew eyes one after another until murmurs began to ripple through the room. Julian saw her when she was halfway up the aisle. His smile died. Martha climbed the stage steps one at a time. The mayor stopped speaking. She took the spare microphone. "Forgive me," she said, voice clean and carrying, "but before this town honors Mr. Vane, there is a lesson overdue." Julian stepped toward her. "Miss Miller, this is neither the time nor the place." Lucas opened the laptop. The screen flickered. Julian's slideshow vanished. In its place appeared Martha's living room. The room went silent. Then the recording began. 12 feet high, under the white light of the projector, Julian's own face filled the screen as his recorded voice echoed through the auditorium. "Do you know how easy this was? Seniors, fixed incomes, no one checks decimal drift." Someone gasped. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Walter Jensen stood halfway out of his chair, eyes blazing. On screen, Julian continued boasting about the micro thefts, about hiding them in system noise, about using public donations as camouflage, about dying seniors financing his future 1 coin at a time. The final line landed like a hammer. It costs very little to buy admiration in a town desperate for heroes. The screen went black. No one moved. Then Martha stepped forward, unfolded a sheet of paper, and spoke like she was once again at the front of a classroom. "This scheme is called salami slicing," she said. "Tiny amounts removed repeatedly from a large number of accounts. Individually too small to trigger outrage. Collectively enormous." Lucas projected the next slide. A clean mathematical breakdown appeared. Sample statements, repeating intervals, decimal variance patterns, projected account scale, estimated cumulative theft. Martha pointed to the screen. "He used variation to hide repetition. He relied on the assumption that the elderly would not notice. He counted on shame, confusion, and trust to do the rest." She turned toward the audience. "His philanthropy was funded by your missing sense." The room erupted, not in chaos, something deeper than that. Betrayal, outrage. People stood, voices rose. Someone shouted his name, another cursed him openly. The mayor stumbled back from the podium, pale and speechless. Julian lunged toward the stage console, but one of the plainclothes men intercepted him. "Don't," the man said. Julian looked toward the exit. The second agent was already there. Lucas rose from his seat. "The evidence package has already been forwarded to federal financial crimes," he said. "Statements, time patterns, account analysis, metadata, and the confession you just heard." Julian's mask finally shattered. "This is fabricated," he shouted. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The nearest agent took his arm. "Julian Vane, also known as Justin Vale, you are being detained pending charges related to wire fraud, financial exploitation of vulnerable persons, and interstate financial crimes." The words barely mattered after that, because the room had already judged him. As the agents pulled him toward the aisle, the Citizen of the Year banner still hanging above him like a taunt, Martha removed her glasses and polished them with a folded handkerchief. Then she looked directly at him. "Justin," she said. He stopped. "You were always good at math." He said nothing, "But you just failed the only test that mattered." The whole hall seemed to lean into the silence after that. Honesty. No one needed her to say the word. They all heard it anyway. Once the room's shock broke, events moved quickly. The FBI agents led Julian down the center aisle while townspeople pulled back from him as if he had become physically unclean. A few stared in furious disbelief. Others looked wounded, not by money alone, but by the humiliation of having trusted him. One older man began shaking so hard his daughter had to sit him down. Edith Barker muttered, "I knew there was something oily about him," though in truth she had not known any such thing. Julian twisted once, trying to turn back toward the stage. "This is insane," he shouted. "You people have no idea how the world works." "No," Walter Jensen growled from the aisle, "but we know a thief when we see one." Julian's expensive composure had deserted him completely now. Under the bright auditorium lights, stripped of charm and stage-managed respectability, he looked less like a distinguished banker than exactly what he had always been, a talented coward in a costly suit. One agent tightened his grip. "Watch your step." Julian laughed bitterly. "You think this old woman beat me?" The agent did not answer. Martha did not move from the stage. She simply watched. There was no triumph on her face, no cruelty, no gloating satisfaction. Only the calm finality of a teacher handing back an exam whose result had long been inevitable. As Julian was taken through the rear doors, Martha looked down at the scattered notes still in her hand. A faint dusting of projector light shimmered over the edges of the paper. Then she spoke once more into the microphone. "Let this be plain," she said. "He did not steal because he was brilliant. He stole because he believed brilliance excused him." The room quieted again. "That belief," Martha continued, "has ruined better men than him." Afterward, the auditorium dissolved into overlapping clusters of outrage, relief, shame, and stunned conversation. Lucas came to the stage carrying the laptop. The mayor approached, looking 20 years older than he had at the start of the evening. "Martha," he said, voice strained, "I don't know what to say." "Then don't begin with speeches," she replied. "Begin with restitution." He nodded quickly. "Yes, of course, immediately." Lucas looked at her with something like awe and something like grief. "You all right?" Martha set the microphone down. "I am old," she said, "not delicate." He gave a faint laugh through the tension. "I'll try to remember that." "You should." But once the room began emptying and the adrenaline drained out of the walls, the cost of the evening became visible in quieter ways. Nora Beth sat crying softly into a napkin near the second row. Walter stood with one fist braced against the back of a chair, breathing hard. The town had not merely exposed a fraud, it had lost an illusion. And illusions, when they break, always leave glass behind. The weeks after Julian's arrest changed Willow Creek in ways both public and private. Federal investigators came in dark coats and practical shoes. Regional banking officers arrived from the city with apologies too carefully worded to sound sincere. News crews appeared twice before Martha firmly refused a third interview. Letters began arriving at her house from former students scattered across the country. Chicago, Denver, Omaha, Portland. Each one saying some version of the same thing. "You taught me to pay attention. You taught me that character matters more than talent. You were right." At the diner, people stood when she entered. At the pharmacy, strangers thanked her in hushed tones as if gratitude itself ought to be respectful. The high school principal asked if she would speak at an assembly. The local paper printed her photograph beneath the headline, "Retired teacher exposes fraud, targeting seniors." Martha disliked the photograph. It made her look stern. Lucas told her that was because she was stern. By late January, the sky had begun staying light a little longer each evening. Winter still ruled the fields, but not with the same absolute grip. Snow on the rooftops softened at the edges by noon and refroze by dusk. Crows returned to the bare trees. The air sometimes carried the faint, wet scent of thaw beneath the iron scent of cold. One evening, Martha sat on her porch in her favorite chair, wrapped in a quilt Daniel's mother had sewn decades earlier. The sunset spread across the western horizon in long bands of amber, rose, and blue-gray, turning the snowfields beyond town into something almost luminous. Porch lights blinked on one by one up the street. Somewhere a screen door banged. Somewhere else a dog barked twice and settled. Her tea steamed gently in the cold. From across the street, Mrs. Landon lifted a hand and smiled. Two boys passing on bicycles slowed and tipped imaginary hats before wobbling away. Walter Jensen, unloading feed sacks from the back of his truck, gave her a solemn nod, usually reserved for veterans and preachers. The town looked at her differently now, not because she had changed, because finally they had remembered how to see. Martha rested both hands on the worn wooden arms of the chair and watched the sun sink lower. She thought about chalk dust floating in afternoon light, about exam papers stacked in careful rows, about students who had become decent adults and students who had grown into polished ruin, about Daniel's laughter in summers long gone, about the cold precision of numbers and the warmer precision of conscience. People often believe wisdom was softness. It wasn't. Real wisdom had edges. It remembered, it noticed. It refused to be bullied by appearances. It understood that evil rarely arrived wearing horns. More often it wore a good suit, funded a scholarship, and smiled for photographs. The world worships speed now. Speed of data, speed of systems, speed of excuses. But speed was not strength. Strength was what remained when fashion, vanity, youth, and noise had all burned away. Martha lifted her teacup and spoke softly into the winter dusk. True strength isn't about the speed of a computer. The wind moved lightly through the bare branches. It's about the resilience of a mind that remembers what is right. The last light touched the snow and turned it briefly gold. Then, with the calm certainty of a theorem solved long ago, she added, "Wisdom never retires." And there, on a porch in a quiet Iowa town, with the day folding shut around her and the whole street carrying her in its newfound respect, Martha Miller sat not as a relic, not as a burden, not as a woman left behind by time, but as what she had been all along, a sentinel, a watcher, a keeper of balance. And in the end, that was the truth no fraud could outrun. Strength isn't power, it isn't money, it isn't youth. It is the resilience of a life well lived, and the courage to stand up, even when the world has already decided to look past you.